Good evening, everybody. My name is Stuart Davis. This is a Flawed Man of God's channel, and I am joined here by my good friend and compatriot, Eric Rolon, who has joined us today to talk about something that we both think is pretty important. But
Yep.
before that, brief introduction to the show. Again, my name is Stuart Davis. I'm a deacon at a small church just outside of Richmond, Virginia. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a biblical scholar. I haven't been to seminary. I'm not trying to get you to join my congregation or donate to any special cause. What I am trying to get you to do is is some influence and some exposure to Christian life, the mind of Christians, Protestants. I guess I should be full disclosure. I'm non-denominational Protestant. Apparently, yeah. um, apparently, there are some differences in doctrines and everything, but the key fundamentals for righteous men of God and women of God remains the same as love God, understand that He is the creator of the universe. He sent Jesus Christ to come and die for our sins and was resurrected 3 days later, and He is the way, the truth, and the life, and there is only one way to heaven, and that is through Him. So, that being said, we had a recent addition to the Flawed Man family. Our friend of the show, Raph, the Rapture, had his first son over not this weekend, but the weekend before that, or during the week before that.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome. Good for
so
him.
yeah, welcome to fatherhood, good sir.
Mhm.
Make a toast for that for you. Um, I, to Edward, um, here's for a long, healthy life. Um, God bless to your parents. I know your dad is a good guy, and he has long awaited your arrival. And may you just live a life that makes him proud, and that makes God proud, and be a man of Christ.
Here,
Edward,
here.
very happy to see that, and he'll be along. I'm sure that he'll have some time at some point to come on the show and talk about the newness of fatherhood. What I did like about what he said, because he listens to the show at least
Awesome.
periodically. And he sent me a text on Sunday. He's like, man, because I didn't doubt that you were right about, having a kid changing your perspective on God. But he goes, I had no idea it was going to be like that impactful. And
Mhm.
I told him, I was like, look, and Eric, I'll tell you this at the same, since your little guy is still pretty young. The older they get, the more perspective it puts in there, because once they start
Sure.
walking and they start making decisions on your own, and you start disciplining them in the back of your head, you're like, I'm kind of doing the same thing in life, and God's talking to me the same way I'm talking to my kids here.
I was thinking about, no joke, I had that very same thought last week where I'm sitting there watching Christian. He was having a fit, and I was having to say like, no, 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 and having to kind of guide him away from something. And I sat there thinking, oh my goodness, what a what a connection finally just sparked up in my brain when I thought, boy, God probably is the same way, going, no, 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 let's go. Oh no, over here, over here. Yes, there you go, there you go. Now you're safe.
Yeah, what'll really, really, really hit you and almost stop you in your tracks sometimes is when you're like, "Look, I've told you several times to stop doing this," and then you keep, and you're like,
Yep.
"How many times has God told me to stop doing something and I keep doing it?" And you're
Yep.
like, "Ugh." I feel like such
Doomed
a hypocrite.
doomed to repeat the lesson until it finally sticks.
Indeed. Indeed, and so yeah, we welcome Raph to welcome Edward to the world, and welcome Raph to fatherhood.
Yes.
I've got nothing but enthusiasm and confidence in your abilities. Eric, I think you got a brief mention on Nick Rekieta's show last night. I was listening to the stream. He
Oh,
was
did
talking
I?
about the Monica Rial / Vic Mignogna story, and he had mentioned that you and we're going to kind of touch on the very similar topic, kind of, but he was talking about people who've been canceled because of their beliefs, specifically. And he's like, I had Eric Rolon on, and he had very, very similar circumstances. His beliefs did not line up exactly with
Yep.
the status quo, and he was kind of given the bum's rush out the door.
Oh yeah, very much so. He's actually I sent him a little care package this week, so messaged me a couple days ago. He said he's going to be opening it up on stream, I guess one of these nights. But yeah, suffice to say that there's definitely a cost for walking the line, and we have to know that as Christians, the moment that you come into the faith, you've painted a big target on your back, and life does indeed become a bit more of a challenge. However, in those challenges are much greater reward, and the lessons learned are of much greater value, I've found.
Yeah. And look, I mean, folks like yourself who, whether you knew it or not, but you decided like, look, this is something I believe in. And you make that stand, and you might realize you're going to die on that hill or not,
Yep.
metaphorically speaking.
Very
but
much so.
but we have those issues, and one of the questions was, we live in a time where we have active shooters, and the question is, if an active shooter gets into the church, and maybe you're secure, you don't have church security, or maybe you have church security that's not able to stop things, and it gets out of control. If the shooter comes up to you and asks you he goes, you can deny Christ, I can shoot you in the face. Uh, that's where the rubber really meets the road. Are we really willing to make that that leap, like
Yep.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, like Daniel and the lion, Daniel and his excursion into the lion's den?
Oh yeah.
Those are important things, but these are things that are more extraneous of the church. It's our belief as we go out into a secular world, as a world that does not share the same beliefs, that is, I don't want to say ignorant, but ignoring the presence of God, and we have to deal with that. But tonight's show is going to focus specifically about internal issues, and we're going to point it it's not limited to, based on some information that actually Raph provided me, it's not limited to us in the Protestant and evangelical movement, but this particular the people in particular that are named
Hmm.
are significantly influential people within the Protestant movement, whether you agree with them or not.
Yep.
The one that, and so back up with the story here, there was a article written by Megan Basham, whatever, at the
It's
Daily
Basham.
Wire, and she was talking about, and we're gonna maybe I should back up a little bit more. We're going to be talking about something that YouTube and other social media outlets do not want us to discuss. So we are going to dance around the very core topic
Yeah.
of the article, which revolves an illness that has surfaced since the late quarter of 2019. All right. So something that has been responsible
Well said.
for a lot of our sequestration, and a lot of stress, not only on our work lives and our social lives, but our spiritual lives as well. Churches have been impacted by this significantly. Eric, I don't know, how has um, uh, local laws affected your church as over the last 2 years?
Sure. So initially everything shut down completely. There was a number of churches as well that did not have service for, I want to say it was the first month to 2 months, and then when they did, it was just they would film their service, or they would film just the pastor giving the message of the day, and then it would go out onto their various social media outlets that they had. The church that we were attending to, they upload, I believe, to Facebook and YouTube at the same time, so you could see a live stream. And if I remember correctly, they did have praise and worship, um, and then it would cut to the pastor. So very, very limited staff that was there, but it was nice because you still got to essentially be able to get fed as you needed to. And it was, I believe, either 4 or 5 months into 2019 that they were finally able to restrictions lifted enough here, and I want to say it was, well, maybe it was later, between like the fifth to eighth month in, restrictions sort of lifted, and we were able to have in-person gatherings again. Um, a lot of people. We actually, my wife and I, we haven't been back to that church, but it's for completely different reasons. And now we're more involved in our actual Bible study that we have on Wednesday nights instead. But I do remember that when it did open up, it was like you had to be masked, of course. Everybody was trying to maintain a certain distance between each other. I think they had, it was like, unless you were a family, it was you sat every other seat, if I'm not mistaken. Or it might have been like every other pew. I don't quite know how they had it all set up, but they did take whatever measures that they believed, according to CDC and World Health Organizations, regarding what you can do to
Constantly shifting
yeah, what you can do to,
advice.
I guess, mitigate the risk.
Yeah. And yeah, and this is not tonight's stream is not going to be discussion on whether you believe in the efficacy of different um, preventative measures, whether you think that this is a conspiracy theory, whether you think it's true. That's neither here nor there. I love a lot of people. Eric and I have our own political opinions.
Yep.
Our own political opinions, for the most part, we try to guide based on our scriptural understanding of the Bible, where it applies, and in other cases, just what we think is the right thing. Um, and but just because somebody else is landing on a different topic politically is not a reason for me to want to separate them um, from my life in a spiritual sense. I always want to be there, especially on something that, for the most part, is a pretty secular issue, in my opinion. But wherever it doesn't matter, whenever you have a hot button topic, uh, which is whether it's secular or not, people try to make it people who either are trying to convince people in religious circles or people who exist in religious circles and want to kind of further justify their opinion will oftentimes use scripture, use faith,
Yep.
use influence in those circles to they twist that to make that into something they believe. And this is not a right or left issue. It goes on uh, left, right, and the middle.
Oh
People
yeah.
will twist scripture to fit their needs, and that is a dangerous thing. That's not something we believe in. So we always try to, at least myself, try to couch that. I'm a good friend of mine. We disagree almost on so many things. Um, politically. But man, if I know, don't deny that he has a burning passion for God and he lives
Mhm.
in the Scripture all the time. But we glean things in our personal lives that are just a little bit different. And we're both, and I can relate to him because we're both very heated about our beliefs, and we had gotten into so many arguments on Facebook that we had to defriend each other
Oh man.
just in those social media spaces so that we could still, you know, be godly men to each other.
Mhm.
And like I said, I've got a great amount of respect for him as a Christian and as a man and as a father. But we just politics is something we just have to shy away from. And I think that that's important, and that's kind of when I talked to Eric, it's like, hey, let's get into this since
Yep.
it's politics in specifically the government. Um,
Yeah. And what's really interesting too is the nature of politics is it relates directly to people. Like that's literally what it is.
mhm,
Politics is the social order. It is what's happening inside your neck of the woods for everybody. And everybody to an extent they to an extent every single person has to participate because we're all part of this grand human experience.
right.
But the degree to which you want to make what you believe or what you act on known to the public, that is of course left up to the individual. It's like so many people will say, if you want to keep friends, don't discuss with them religion or politics. um it's for the same reason that you mentioned your buddy and you unfriended each other on social media outlets because you didn't want to see the opinions that they had and vice versa in such a light that it made you suddenly want to not have anything to do with them anymore. It was like you still wanted to hold on to the friendship that you had. And hey, I don't need to know about your political opinions or what you think about X, Y, and Z. Just let me enjoy you in the snapshot that I have when we're hanging out. Which is also why I tell people don't follow your heroes if you want to keep them your heroes on social media.
Exactly. And I think that that's part of, and that to me, that's like, you can have your heroes like Well, I mean, you're a voice actor, right? So, I mean, there are people who want your autograph, want to meet you, and everything. So you understand that. It probably has some sort of impact on how you view yourself,
Oh,
as an
absolutely.
example to other people, but also understanding that your decisions, like what you did, might alienate people who looked up to you and thought that you would be just like all the other people that they assumed believe
Oh,
a
yeah.
certain thing.
No, absolutely. And it's so funny because I still do have a lot of people that I look up to and admire inside the acting world that I refuse to follow on social media because of how derisive they are or how, like you said, alienating. Um, doesn't change the fact that they're still a hell of an actor or a hell of an
Yeah.
actress. It's just like,
Alec Baldwin.
yeah, for me, Steve Bloom, for me,
Oh yeah,
it's like, hey, you can be as loudmouth as you want, but I get to choose whether I want to see it or not whenever I
right.
open up Facebook or Twitter or Reddit or what have you. Um, and with, I guess that would honestly be I think a great line to segue into this whole
Mhm. Yeah, because I
just
think that that's really where this is. That's how it's just naturally turning. Because where will it naturally turn? It's going to naturally turn to within the church. So,
yeah,
so you can go if you're watching this, you can go on the Daily Wire and you can read this. It is behind a paywall and see if and read it yourself. Eric was able to source it elsewhere some on some other site.
yeah. I'll drop it
Um,
in the chat in case anybody wants
okay,
to look up after this.
the Babylon Bee's alternate site, not the Bee, where they do the more truthful site. They covered it pretty well. There was some other stuff in there that I thought was interesting that I wanted to discuss as well. But um, for warning, these are right of center publications, and they do have their axes to the grind.
Yep.
Whether they're coming from a perspective of faith, so um, try to discern that whether you agree with them politically or not. Try to discern that, but and look, this is very much a hit piece on Francis Collins, the Institute of Health director, um, Francis
Yeah.
Collins, the NIH director, Francis Collins. But what they pull up is important to us in the church, and
Yes.
some names were names that came out that were very influential. I think the one that hit me the hardest was Rick Warren, who is not just a megachurch pastor, which is always something where I start to cringe when I hear megachurch pastor. I'm always like,
Mhm.
but he's also the author and creator of Purpose Driven Life, which has been a beacon for a lot of people.
Mhm.
What about a decade and a half ago? I think it came out, Purpose Driven Life. Um, when I started hearing it, um, just a beacon for bringing people to the faith, which is important, and we should
Mhm.
not take away from um, good things that have brought people to Christ and have saved them. But as we know from King David and many other people in the Bible, doing good deeds does not absolve you from the misdeeds that you make.
Yep.
And it also doesn't mean that if you're doing good deeds one day, that doesn't mean you're not going to be screwing up the next day. And I think that
Yep.
this is a very big problem, and it has to do with something we're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah. Not quite to the degree that we want to.
Right.
Um,
We could get really deep in that one.
yeah.
It'd be a whole show, 24-hour stream.
Well, I guess big question. Where would you like to start on this? Because I know I've got several notes that I've already written down, just kind of
Okay.
on the piece as a whole. Um, but I'd like to see where you'd like to go first.
Um, it doesn't really give me a good place to start at the beginning. Um, Tim Tim Keller is the first person it mentions, but what are your notes surrounding?
So mine, what the overarching argument that I would make in opposition to what we're seeing inside here, and for those who haven't read the article yet, what this more or less distills down to is there, as I'll just read the title of the the article here by Daily Wire. It's how the federal government used evangelical leaders to spread COVID propaganda to churches. Now, people on left side of the aisle would probably call it COVID truth. People on the right would probably call it COVID lies, and people who don't know either way would probably just call it misinformation. But what the whole article really boils down to is how you had people within the church, within these very, very large, essentially corporate church bodies, that were being directly tapped by an Obama administrated or a Obama appointed director. His name is Francis Collins. Uh, he was encouraging them to stress to their congregations how important getting the vaccine is and how important complying with essentially all of the regulations that the CDC was laying forth with regards to how they should approach their own personal protective equipment that they wore, whether or not they should get the vaccine, all the vaccines, all the boosters along with it. And they were really trying to push these ministers to talk to their flock and not not exactly strong arm them, but really, really, really encourage them, even to the degree that they would twist scripture and they would twist the truth of the Bible to serve really wicked means in getting their congregation to go and vaccinate themselves and really, really guilt them into doing so. And it's really, really disheartening on the whole to see some of the names that are listed there from some of the ministers that have gone and entertained this kind of behavior. And it's also an indictment to those within the church who, much like in the book of Proverbs, are fools who die for lack of sense. And it's like you said, it's a hit piece, definitely. And I don't think it could have been written any other way, because what
No,
happened behind the scenes was definitely seedy and unsavory, to say the least.
yeah, and that's what Christianity. This is the reason this is a problem, because it's and we can and we're not the only ones. Like I said, Catholics are having their own fight with modernization within their church. I don't know about the Eastern Orthodoxy. I'm sure there's some you know some shenanigans going on that side. But on the Protestant side, we have to deal with, while we're much more loosely structured, we're way more independent because it's a conglomeration of denominations within there.
Mhm.
We The evangelical side is still kind of the Wild West. Now we're not like anarchy like you see with the what's the other name for the Pentecostals? The
Oh,
think
Word of Faith, NAR,
I can't remember. It's something like it's not contemporary, not compassion, but it's something
Progressive
else.
Christianity.
Yeah, it's some sort of that, but it's not anarchy where you're just doing whatever you want. Um,
Sure,
but within the evangelical side of things, and my non-denominational kind of touches into there a little bit, kind of touches into
sure.
Baptist things a little bit, and then but it's its own identity. But we're all kind of viewed in the same group at that point. All church, all faith is at reputation is at stake whenever
Mhm,
any of the churches step misstep. But you know what you see is the folks out there who are involved in scandal when there's
mhm.
sexual scandals, there are
Yep.
financial scandals, there is and then we got the prosperity preachers out there like crap, now I can't think of his name out there.
Kenneth
Not
Copeland,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Kenneth
Cref
Copeland. Kenneth
Creflo
Copeland's a good one, but I
Dollar,
was, Osteen,
Joel
Joel Osteen.
Osteen.
Osteen, yeah, ostentatious Osteen over there, and we there's nothing we can do about them because they've they've created their own monolith. They're getting donations. We can't do anything about them, and it hurts. It hurts us as a community to see that stuff go on because we know
It
it's wrong,
does. It does,
and we
and,
can.
it's honestly, it's why you see people that when Paul lists out what the actual gifts of the Spirit are, it's why there is such a huge, huge weight that is leveled on those who would call themselves teachers and shepherds, or ministers and leaders, because for much as Jesus, when he would teach the parables and he said to his disciples, look, it's by volition of the Holy Spirit that anybody is given any kind of clarity on these parables, which is why he says they'll see without seeing and hear without hearing. It's why there is such weight placed upon teachers or those who would call themselves a minister, because oftentimes what is making sense to you may not make sense to just the simple layman. And if you're as delved into the scriptures as you should be, then you should be presenting that biblical truth and what the word says accurately. And you shouldn't be trying to take an outside influence, political or otherwise, and then trying to fit that into the Bible to make the Bible now say what you want it to say or what they want it to say, and thereby sway your simple minded flock, or those who don't read their Bible on the regular like we all should. It's why I said at the top of this that it's also an indictment on congregations who aren't studied up enough. And uh, again, to kind of summate what the article really touches on is you have people with inside the mega church. I'm going to call it the mega church industry. You do have like the Joel Osteens, the Creflo Dollars, the Kenneth Copelands. You have
Forgot about him.
you have the Rick Warrens of the world, and they were essentially tapped by people that are working on behalf of the NIH, working on behalf of CDC, and people who are really taking their marching orders directly from Dr. Anthony Fauci and his whole team that is behind him. And not only are they presenting to their congregations falsities and flat out lies, but they're now giving them information that is with his guilt trippy as it is now causing a lot of their flock to sacrifice their right to freedom of conscience in lieu of essentially falling in line and walking lockstep with the herd right now. Because there's something like, I think the number the other day I heard was we have over 270 million people of our 300 plus million people inside the US that are fully vaccinated and boosted right now. And so you have a lot of preachers who, whether they're on the take monetarily um, from from the government, as it were, or Fauci's team, whether their palms are being greased. I have to imagine that there is some sort of backdoor dealing that is going on. I don't think that anybody is just going to do this willy-nilly without some kind of reward or reparation granted to them. But you have a lot of trigger words and trigger sentences being used by ministers to compel their flock, to compel the people that are in those seats and in those pews to go out and put a drug inside their body that is still classified as experimental and is still only being used under emergency use authorization. And it's it's a dangerous thing to essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, but to essentially say like, oh, Jesus wants us to love our neighbors, and the way that we do that is by making sure that if we're in close proximity with them, we have ourselves taken care of and them taken care of by injecting ourselves with something that they're claiming, oh, it didn't come from the Wuhan lab, where we have a abundance of evidence that suggests that yes, it did. We have more evidence coming out daily as this packet is being addressed, little pages, little groupings of pages at a time. And I think we're going to get the full story of what all happened over the last 3 years and like 50 years from now, something like that.
Yeah.
But there's sufficient enough evidence that anybody, not just doing your little WebMD Google search, but anybody who's actually looking up some of the heads inside the business, the Dr. Malone's, the Dr. McCullough's, people that have worked directly either with the creation of certain vaccines or the treatments of them, and who have papers that they've written up into the 60s, which show not only their breadth of knowledge on the subject, but give them a whole lot more credibility to look at what they've said and put more stock into it. And you have the same talking points that you see inside leftist news media, inside CNN, MSNBC, and some even from Fox as well. You see the same talking points that a lot of those big anchors kept hitting over and over and over and over and over, now being fed to people from the pulpit.
Right.
And again, if anybody has done their research, because people say, oh, there's no evidence to support this, no evidence to support that. For those who have done as Acts 17:11 dictates, and that's not just treating the Bible as something that you need to search daily, but also when you hear something that you're uncertain of, taking it upon yourself to dig through it. For those who aren't doing that, their due diligence to research down every single rabbit hole and find the truth, find that thread of truth that is woven through every story. It's it's so damaging to those people in their congregations and in their communities. And it comes down to the ministers feeding lies, knowing that they're feeding lies, and it comes down to the congregation either knowing that they're being fed a lie and choosing to go along with it and not speak up about it, or not realizing they're being fed a lie because they haven't done their own due diligence to search out the truth, which
Right.
there is, in my opinion, and in many doctors' opinions, and I would say even in Joe Rogan's opinion, there's plenty of evidence out there that supports the exact opposite of what most of these evangelists are saying and what the talking points that they've been fed are dictating.
Yeah, and I think that, and we'll use the Nick Rekieta countervailing statement here, just so anybody from YouTube,
Yep.
if for somebody
Yep.
comes down on this very small YouTube channel of mine, but we're not health experts.
Nope.
We're giving instant opinions, and this is really commentary of a spiritual nature.
Yep.
Your medical decisions need to be made by you arming yourself with whatever information you can, and that includes reading what the CDC and the NIH and all the other expert organizations say, and making your own personal decision from there, and
Yep.
also talking to your doctor,
Yes.
your physician, who you should have some level of trust with, and have a
Yes.
very honest conversation, and from there make the decision that you think will best serve your interests
Yep.
from there.
And serve your health. It
And
is
yeah,
up to the
we want people to stay healthy. I
Yep.
know people who have died from it,
Yep.
nobody here is going to deny that it is not a thing.
Yep.
But
We're not
the real
science deniers.
right the controversy here, again, like Eric said, and this is the thing when we talk about from a Protestant perspective, the Protestant movement prides themselves of we took our faith into our own hands, regardless of whether we're right about that or not, with the Reformation. But we took our faith into our own hands. Well, if you're going to take your faith into your own hands, you better take it into your own hands and not
Yep.
just assume that somebody else is going to give you the information for you. You need to be in your Bible. You need to be listening to things. But at the same time, there are some people who are full of faith, but they put their faith in God, and they put their faith in God that their minister and their pastor is going to feed them what they need to hear, because maybe they're not equipped to hear it themselves. That's
Yep.
where the danger lies.
Oh yeah.
That's where the power can get. Again, one of the things I love about Tom Clancy is when he's writing about espionage, he talks about why when people defect, why do they do it? They
Mm.
do it for money. They do it for because they're doing it for revenge of some sort, and they're going to do it or they'll do it because they're ideologically aligned with the nation or entity organization
Yep.
that they decide to defect to. And I think there's a fourth one, I can't remember it, but we're not necessarily talking about defecting from the faith, but we're talking about reasons why you might do something as a minister that you wouldn't normally do. Why
Yes.
you would interject something that is secular, that is not really um, it grounded in the faith, as as something that is scripturally based. And that was one of the things that's. So we'll quote something from the article here. We're going
Yep.
to quote a couple of parts here. Um, I want to exhort pastors once again to try to use your credibility with your flock to put forward the public health measures that we know we can work with. That's coming from Collins, Francis Collins, and he is telling this to Stetzer. What is Ed Stetzer? I think his name is.
Yep. Ed
Yeah,
Stetzer.
Ed Stetzer. In an interview, and Stetzer is just Stetzer ostensibly just lets that go, as opposed to going, well, hold up, now you're trying to use spiritual capital to spend on something that's the one they might not believe in. and now
Mhm.
whether you agree with it or not, and whether you bought into it, now if something comes out and you're wrong about it, where does that leave the congregational member? You've
Yep.
talked to me about something that's aside from God, but you use that pulpit, you use that influence to say it. And look, you can say something that's part of the job of a minister. It's a 24/7 job. People die at all different hours of the day. People
Yep.
have crises at all different types of the day. And when they see you on social media, they when you're a reverend, um, you know, or minister, what pastor, whatever your title is, they see you and they go, "That's my pastor," or "That's the
Yep.
pastor at so and so." So when they say later on, he goes, "Well," he said, "ministers might not feel comfortable about doing that, which they shouldn't."
No.
He says, I just tell them when you get vaccinated, post a picture and say, oh, so thankful I was able to be vaccinated. Stetzer said, people need to see that it is the reasonable view. That's propaganda. That's not spiritual feeding or whatnot. That's coordinated propaganda.
Yep, and that's throwing out discernment of any kind right there, because like you were just mentioning that he talks about, he says use essentially your spiritual credentials and the clout that you have gained over endearing these people to you through either the way you present yourself or the way your church presents the worship experience. You're now using your clout to compel them, to persuade them. And if these are people that have built up trust in you, um, and you've not given them a reason to doubt you one way or the other, then they're gonna look at this and go, "Oh, okay. If my pastor's talking about it, then it must clearly line up somewhere with the Bible,
Right.
somewhere with the Word." And I guess that means that I now have to go and act upon this. And then the this weird hive mind mentality, where you see people taking selfies of themselves, getting the jab, and then putting inside their bios, I'm Eric Rolon, fully vaxxed, on their Twitter handles and such. It's it, it's like it really is the mainstreaming progressivization of the church here. It's
It's making even more fractures in there. Okay,
yes, yes,
we have not been able to heal yet. There's still a big racial divide in many churches. There are
yep,
black churches, there are white churches, and there are things
yep,
like there. And there's I know there's difficulty in sometimes in getting them um, to interact with each other when there's a lot of similar belief, and ways for us to be more powerful. There's that. There's the political divide, and modernization within the church is a big thing. Now, I argue that modernization needs to be rejected out because it is external of the Bible. It is bringing external factors into the Bible, and I think it has hurt Catholic Church, and it has hurt the Methodists big time recently. The
yeah,
Episcopalians, they got nailed big. They got nailed a while ago, and it's and Church of Christ, right? You got Southern Churches of Christ, which are like Duck Dynasty style guys, who I think are way more in the Word, and then you go up north, and here's another one for a topic I haven't talked to you about it yet, but I think it's going to be another topic of ours. We had a female pastor at a Church of Christ church talk about how she felt God's presence comforting her as she went into Planned Parenthood to have an abortion, and she puts that forward toward the church. Now we're going to have a different
yeah,
discussion on that. But again, that's modernization in there. When I talk about modernization, it is introducing things. It's trying to excuse or sterilize or nullify
yeah,
sin instead
yep.
of saying, "Hey, you're a sinful person. You're broken. Your soul is damaged. So is mine. We're working together." That's what
Mhm.
church is. It's here for broken people trying to heal. It is a hospital for the soul. It is a
Yep.
doctor's
It's
office
what
for the
Paul
soul.
talks about inside Romans, where he says, based on a person's conscience, they can excuse or unexcuse any kind of behavior. Um, and what I've really, really been seeing, just not only in this article here, but in some other churches that are in action in Atlanta, in Florida, and just across the US. What I'm really seeing side here is a lot of them are leaning really super heavily on the same passage, chapter of Romans, which is Romans 14. And for those who don't really know what that chapter is about, it's essentially talking about um, not doing something that would cause a brother to stumble. Even if we know in our heart what is, letting that be between us and God. And then for the sake of our brother who may be observing us out in the wild, as it were, out in general population, not acting in a way in front of that brother or that sister that would cause them to then fall into sin. And people use it to make an argument for or against either getting the jab or not getting the jab, and making potentially life altering health decisions that could leave incredibly long term ramifications or short term ramifications or in death in some cases. What really I think tore at me the hardest was the fact that we've essentially had the lid blown off everything over the last couple of years, whether it be through new media, which is the Facebooks, the Reddits of the world, the Tumblrs, the Rumble, all that. We've had so many individual and singular reporters, as it were, who have been trying to dig to the bottom of this. And it's like the era of podcasting right now is such that people are just reaching out to those who have an actual credible say so in any matter of life and saying, hey, will you come into my show and talk about this? Because I don't see you being given a platform to speak on any of these other mainstream broadcasts, and people need to hear what's going on. So you have, Dr. McCullough, you have Dr. Malone, both go on Joe Rogan, and they're able to get the word out to millions and millions and millions of people. And suddenly people are going, wow, this is so different to what I've heard. What really scrapes at me here is we have, since the whole lid has been blown off things, and not only did we have hearsay in the beginning, we had hunches and hearsay, and well, I'm not quite sure about this. I'm hearing people say such and such, but I don't know where I can find it. Now we have so much evidence that points to, yes, this was made in a lab. We have Dr. Fauci perjuring himself in front of the DOJ that gain of function research was carried out, and it was done so at the NIH's behest, and it was done so on the American taxpayers' dollar. And we have such an overwhelming amount of evidence, but yet even though that evidence exists, and the overwhelming majority of us who have been digging into this and trying to figure out, where is the truth from the beginning, even though we know, they are still telling the lie. And they're telling that lie repeatedly over and over and over. Now, for some, that is designed to just wear them down, but they're also counting on the simple who have not done any kind of research and are only watching mainstream news outlets. They're counting on them not bothering to check this up, and they're counting on them just taking it at face value because of their doctor credentials. And so when I see I'm just going to read a little chunk from this here, but this is under the little section of the whole article titled "Christians and Conspiracy Theories." This is much earlier. This is Setzer talking here. They're talking about further helping the NIH's preferred coronavirus narratives. He says, much earlier in the pandemic, as an editor at evangelicalism's flagship publication, Christianity Today, CT, Stetzer had also penned essays that were parroting Collins' arguments on conspiracy theories. Among those, he lambasted other believers for entertaining the hypothesis that the coronavirus had leaked from a Wuhan lab, which we know to be true now. In a now deleted essay, preserved by Web Archive, Stetzer chimed
Now
in.
deleted essay.
Yeah. If you want to believe that some secret lab created this biological weapon and now everyone's covering that up, I can't stop you. Almost as if to say, like, if he's saying that, if he presents that same exact thing from the pulpit, he's more or less calling into question the intelligence of his flock, which should be insulting on its face there, because he is suggesting that people can't bother to do their own research and find things out, which is what we're supposed to do, even in the face of hearing the best sermon ever or the best reading of whatever scripture ever. We're still told, hey, receive that, but you better be searching the scriptures daily to find out if what you're hearing from that pulpit is in fact true. And that, like I said again at the top of this talk, that applies to anything in life. Like,
Right.
you have people looking at the 1619 Project who are idiots who aren't going to bother to look into history. They're going to go, oh wow, all that craziness happened. Wow, this whole
Yeah.
mess we're in is all just about race.
Somebody wrote it. It must be true.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
see, that
I
was
saw I saw it in a book. Heard it from my teacher. I believe it now.
I was talking to this about because and I do because we still haven't moved. We had a malfunction on the heating system.
Hmm,
The heat
okay.
exchanger went bad in the sanctuary
Oh,
of our
oh
church.
no.
So we have continued to meet in the gym. And so I do set up for the gym right before church. And then once I'm done with that, I send the kids so that they can start their Sunday school. And then before I teach the Sunday school class I do, I hang out with the older folks in there and talk to them about it. And all this. If we really want to backpedal, at least in my experience, where I first started to experience kind of like disinformation within the church, it wasn't really within the church or disinformation about church was when the Da Vinci Code came out. When Dan Brown wrote the Da Vinci Code, I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah,
when he
yeah,
wrote
yeah.
that, but when it went mainstream and it became very popular, I was like, okay, this sounds like a thriller, right? Because I'm very much, like I said, a Tom Clancy fan. I like to read thrillers like that. And this seemed just like something that I would enjoy. And I started reading. I was like, oh, it's got a faith angle to it. And then I started listening and I started reading some more. And I'm like, nope, this is some really like extraneous. This is, and so I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
where is
there's a
this guy
lot of
getting
liberties
this stuff?
taken there.
That it's and I had and at the time we were getting ready. My army unit was getting ready to deploy, and so I was doing a lot of work next to a someone very senior to me, an enlisted guy, very senior to me, and he had bought into the entire thing. This is everything that Robert
Mm,
or Dan Brown's character says is 100% true. It's all verifiable, information. And I was like, dude, I grew up Christian all my life, and a lot of this stuff is wrong now. And it's very clear when you read the Da Vinci Code. Dan
yeah.
Brown has a big problem with Catholicism. He's got some sort of accent on
Yeah.
him,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's very apparent. And but it's also very misleading. So when I would go back to my small group studies, I'd be like, look, I'm reading the Da Vinci Code. I was like, I it's a very good and intriguing thriller. As far as plot wise, it's got lots of twists and turns. It's like, but before you pick up that book, you better be very strong in your faith because he's going to throw
Yes.
out as much doubt at you as possible. The whole thing centers, spoiler alert, the book's been around for a million years. Spoiler alert, it all centers around Jesus having a kid.
Yep.
And that's what and
With
it's
Mary Magdalene.
yeah, right, with Mary Magdalene. Now, and here's the bottom line is that if he did, does that change anything about the message? No, doesn't change. And that was the thing. If even if you buy into all this garbage that he puts across there, that doesn't change what Jesus did, what Jesus said, and what Jesus is.
Mhm.
Not going to say was because but what Jesus is, and but that was the first time I saw like people trying to, and I didn't know at the time, but that this kind of stuff had been going on within different churches and organizations for decades before that. And it's been very disheartening to see. But that was the first time that I really saw, cracks in faith where people are changing their understanding of Christ in a way that's just based on misinformation. And
Oh
that's kind of
yeah.
the problem. That's the problem. What we're dealing with here is a personal medical decision.
Yep.
It is a personal medical decision. It doesn't have to do with with your spiritual faith. If you
Mm-mm.
think it has something to do with your spiritual faith, then you have a one-on-one conversation with your pastor or
Yep.
whoever your faith you're pulling your faith, um, whoever your rock is for going to with faith crisis questions or whatever. You go to them and you let them talk to you now, and that's fine. And as a minister, I would think it would be your responsibility to be like, look, this is my personal opinion and this is why I feel about this. And this is and then you go into you put that disclaimer ahead of them so they
Yeah.
understand. And there's a good chance they might listen to you. And it's not wrong for you as a minister to have an opinion and to tell somebody. But you
Yeah.
can't stand up on a pulpit and discuss it like like it's coming from God. And you can't put that on social media where
Yep.
you're basically doing the same thing
Yep.
and you're putting God's stamp of approval on it, where it may or may not exist. And not only that, and then you're taught, but then you start castigating people that think
Yeah,
you
that's
think are wrong about something, and then when it we could be wrong about it all day and great, that and fine and dandy.
mhm,
But if you when things start to come out, and if things do come out and all these conspiracy theories end up being true, um, then where does that lead you?
do you
End up
double
looking,
down?
yeah, do you double down because you already look like a fool, or do you come back and go, folks, I've made a big mistake. And I think that that would be the appropriate thing.
Yep,
And at that point, my thing is that when you're a faith leader and you make a big misstep, I don't think that that keeps you from salvation, but I do think that that's where you say, I need to step down from ministry.
yeah,
I need to stop trying to lead people. I need to become a follower and help from that point and just realign and restart my faith or my
yep.
following in Christ because I have I have breached trust.
Yeah,
Um,
and this really strikes at an even deeper seated issue within the progressive church right now, and the church as a whole, is there has been an infiltration. There has been an absolute infiltration into the not just the teaching side of the ministry, but inside the smaller umbrella parts of that ministry, all the way down into childcare, where you have places like Elevation Worship and you have places like Hillsong United that are essentially they're teaching children how to astral project, and they're teaching them Eastern mysticism inside their Sunday school classes, which is absolutely,
what?
yeah, absolutely condemned. Like they're having these children. You can find some videos on YouTube actually about this from over at Hillsong United, where it was either Hillsong or Elevation. I want to say it was Hillsong, but they had essentially these children had all shared the same exact actual astral projection instance. They had all essentially had this out of body experience, and when these kids came back from their trip, they were told, "Hey, draw what you saw," and they all drew the exact same picture. But they were all sitting way apart from each other, not looking at what each other was drawing, and there has been an infiltration even to that level where it's already at the kid level, and who's teaching the children within the church in Sunday school. And it has been infiltrated so thoroughly that now, since we had such a big push from all the news outlets to get the word out about the coronavirus and what you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones, once they covered essentially the secular world, then they set their sights on the Christian and the faith world, and they decided, hey, um, we're going to push more or less the exact same identical message that Fauci's been pushing out. And now, because people, you have to have a faith. Everybody has to believe in something. Otherwise, you're going to fall for everything. And you're taking now people that have this faith, and they're looking at it at a minister who is supposed to have all this credibility, much like somebody else looks at the news organizations or Fauci and his team as essentially that's their ministry that they're beholden to. You have people that are knowingly espousing lies, and the only thing that I can think of that would compel them to do so from the pulpits is that they are in love with money, and we know that money in and of itself is not evil, but the love of it is. And
Yes.
the love of money is what is going to compel so many people, indeed ministers, into saying what is popular and what is convenient over what is hard, truthful, and difficult to hear. They're more concerned with keeping butts in the seats and tithe checks coming into the offering bucket than they are with actually caring for these people's souls, giving them concrete truth from the word that they can apply to their lives, and in effect be able to treat their physical man as well, because the Bible's got plenty to say inside of it on how you can essentially live a fulfilled life spiritually and physically. um we even see into the book of Daniel where the king and all of his cohorts, they're all eating, just the most rich and just over the top meals, the best meats and whatnot. Daniel and his boys, they're eating vegetables, and they see after a couple of
Yeah.
weeks, hey, Daniel and his boys are doing better. Like, yeah, we can get some health tips from there. But the the problem is that, and I do believe this. You have so many ministers, and I don't even think this is. I mean, this is common knowledge at this point, but so many ministers, they corporatized the church. And, you know, almost, well, I should say every single big mega church, and even the smaller church that I grew up in back in Rochelle, Illinois, you're going to have your bookstore where, of course, you're going to have the pastor's books being sold. They're going to have their own devotional series. They're going to have, within those devotional series, you're going to have one for couples, one for singles, one for college age, one for teenagers, one for young adults. All this stuff, they've built essentially their church brand, and it is all about keeping that cash flow coming in, because that greed gets a hold of them, and suddenly now they're taking the word and they're trying to retrofit it with this prosperity gospel mindset, all for the sake of getting more money funneling into the church to funnel into their own pockets. It's like, why is Kenneth Copeland, um no joke, the richest minister bar none right now? Is it
Because
because,
people giving them money. Look,
yeah,
they're
is it
giving them
because
money.
God just said, "Hey, you
Completely.
know, you've done so good, my faithful and trustworthy
I
servant,"
hate
or
that.
has he sold somebody on a lie? Has he sold somebody on a nigh unattainable lifestyle that only the very, very few and select can ever reach? And
He's
he just happens to be one of them, but he's going to give you all the tips and all the tricks how to get there.
Yeah.
All,
That's an old grift, and unfortunately, when you can prey upon people who are desperate to have something,
yep,
uh,
they're desperate
you
for
get
truth.
them, you deceive them, and profiting by it. But I don't care about that. That guy, Copeland, Austin, they're going to have their day of reckoning, whether it's here on Earth. Hopefully for them, it's here on Earth before, and they're able to change before it's too late, or they'll get it up in judgment. I don't want to be there for that.
Yep.
But
His net worth is $760 million.
that is insane. And
And now,
here's the thing: you've got the desperate people, right, that you're fooling and you're profiting and you're milking their funds from. But then you got the people who could possibly could be great Christians. I mean, great Christians, and they have a good heart, and they're sense, but they're also sensible people. And that's look. I can look at a prosperity preacher and go, yeah, I'm not buying that
no,
crap.
peddling snake oil.
You can suck sand and get out of here. But there's I don't have to be a person of faith to see that. They see that and immediately they go, that's Christianity. Everything's a money
Yes.
game, and
Oh,
they're trying to take it. And I it's hard for me. I got to tell that's not what it's about. But I mean, there there's a lady I used to work with, sweetheart of a lady. She loved her to death, and she goes, "I won't go to church because they just want my money." And I think that she probably has. I don't know what her faith in God. I can't remember. It's been a while since we worked together, but she goes, "I'm not going to church. They want my money," and that's what said. If you're going to a church, tithing is a real thing. It is something that we encourage.
mhm.
But, my minister might do it quarterly, probably once every 6 months. That's probably a more accurate statement. He will touch on it. He's very bold about it, and when he says, he goes, "Look," he goes, Bible's very clear, tithe 10%, this other thing, this is what we expect." But he doesn't harp on it. If a guy is like Kenneth Copeland, and man, I'm gonna have Reverend Hans Feeney on here. He does a great clip on his YouTube channel about devil wearing a Kenneth
Mm,
Copeland suit, and he clips
mm,
this one thing. He goes, "Just because laid off from COVID, don't you stop tithing? Tithing to who? To Kenneth Copeland."
mhm.
And that's that I try to when I'm on Christian Twitter, when I'm on theology Twitter, and I'm listening to people, I see that
Mm,
I will call it it's a first circular firing squad, and I try to say, look, there are we are dealing with the same issues in different ways because
yep,
we have different doctrines. But we're all dealing with this problem of modernization. But you can all point a finger at the prosperity preachers and go, "You're part of the biggest problem because he's keeping people from going to Lutheran churches, keeping people from going to non-denominational, keeping people from going to Catholic churches.
yep,
You're keeping people away from the faith altogether." It's because no matter where they look, if they think that it's a money grab, they're going to find it because the church
yep.
does need money.
Yeah, and it boils down essentially from any outside observer looking at a Christian and what their life has amounted to. It boils down to your barometer for success, living a successful Christian life, is monetary. It boils it down just to that. Like not even that
Or
you're
materialistic things.
yeah, not that you're living to the fullest, that you're trying to foster community, that you're trying to build up your family, build up other believers, and trying to, you're getting down there in the trenches with them. Like not that, like if I can kind of brag on our my Bible study a little bit, what I look inside there is a snapshot of what I wish I could see from the church worldwide, and that's you have people that are supportive of each other's adventures, are brave enough to give a firm rebuke and some counseling when it's needed, when they see somebody getting out of pocket. But also, you see people inside there where they're like, hey, we're moving in 2 weeks and we could use some people to help carry some boxes. And suddenly everybody's like, yep, I'll be there. What time do you need me there? I'll bring donuts and coffee, stuff of that nature. It's like, that to me is what really really living a Christian life is, seeking to live as is detailed for us in the New Testament, seeking to live that quiet life with similarly minded individuals, being able to share and indulge in the love that is given to us. We get to share and indulge in that and share and give it to others, while at the same time being aware that every single thing that we do is under a microscope. And so to live your life as one who is worthy of the call that has been placed on your heart, and live as that witness, so that you can then build that family bigger and you can grow that community even larger and do the same things. Instead, no, we get this image through prosperity gospel of, if you want to be a successful Christian, then it's going to show monetarily. It's going to show in your bank account. If you're really, really living for the Lord, then you can't hope to have anything but a 7-figure income by the time you reach my level, as as
Yeah.
their Rolex
If you
glints off the
if you want to be
spotlight.
just like Job, if you want to be just like Job
Oh,
at
oh
the
my
end of Job,
God.
not all the stuff beforehand, but at the
Yeah.
end of Job, and we get it. You got Abraham, like you said, I thought you all really put it in perspective more than me. I always just thought, okay, Abraham's pretty successful. You put it in good perspective. Abraham's one of the richest men on the earth at that point.
Mhm.
I mean, he is very successful, but that's not, and it flies in the face of the rich man coming to Christ and saying,
Yes.
what do I need to do to go to heaven?
Yep.
And while many people, I think, misinterpreted what the eye of a needle
Yeah.
really means, but again, it's like if your pastor is wearing a $1,000+ suit, or a 5-figure suit or more, driving a a car that you won't that costs more than you'll make in 5 years,
Mhm.
and has his own private, and maybe will go has his own private plane and own yacht, and we're getting into that level. Guess what? You're going to the wrong church, because no
Yep.
pastor who's worth his salt, who really believes what the church is keeping that much money.
Yep.
They're not keeping that much money. You know, I'm, it's and that's and those guys are the obvious guys out there.
Yeah.
Smaller churches, I think the pastors there. I mean, I guess you could question whether they want to get to that level, and I'm sure there are some people like that.
Oh,
Everybody's trying to make their
absolutely.
peace, but I think that a lot of times we have maybe misguided pastors, or pastors that are bought into, or just there's no malice involved, but they go, I need to save people. And in order to save people, I need to get them into church. And so whatever we need to do to get them into church,
Yep.
or I'm not I'm not creative, and I'm not living in the spirit. Like I mean, I live in the spirit, but I don't know how to market myself or
Yep.
market my sermons or whatnot.
How to curate
Let
a
me
service so it's sexy.
let me go and um purchase this study, and we'll go over it that way. And or let me focus group something, and like I said, as like some people that works with, but to me, and I know other people are like me, it seems forced, and it does, and when it seems
It
forced,
does.
it's inauthentic. And then
Yep.
I'm kind of, I start checking out a little bit. But I feel like I'm comfortable enough in my faith that I can, while I'm there, I'll just start doing my own thing. I was like, okay, well, I'm here, he's trying to reach people, he's not reaching me right now, so let me do what I can to kind of just go with where he's talking about and find out why I think he's wrong, or
Yep.
just where I think the conversation the sermon should be going, or something like that.
Yep. And that's
I'm fine with
that's
it.
and that's why I say that the thing that must be compelling these ministers to take this stance and then bring it to their congregation, is that they are on the take. I think there is probably some exchange of money that's been going on here, and for a lot of them, because the progressive church has been so infiltrated, like that, the NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation, the Word of Faith movement, the whole name it and claim it, the whole prosperity gospel, this this amalgamation that we see was born out of infiltration by ne'er-do-wells within inside the church, who have not just monetized the effort and corporatized the church itself, but you have people that have also made their way into the ranks of these big time ministers and these big time ministries that are from other organizations like the Masons, like Illuminati, like some of those ancient serpent brotherhoods. If you look up Billy Graham, and you go into his history, you see a lot of ties that he had directly with the Masonic Temple. You see him even posing in photos doing the lion paw on his chest, or when he shakes somebody's hand, instead of going in like this, he puts his thumb on top as a symbol of power over that person. You can see plenty of stuff like that. And some of it is real conspiracy theory esque, but there's enough receipts that exist throughout his entire life that you can connect all the dots.
Right. And
And
you can call it Mason, or you can say the Masons, you can say Illuminati, where it all come the source for all of it is Satan,
yep,
right?
it's Eastern
It's Satan,
mysticism just
and
repackaged and
right,
try.
it's whatever we can do to dilute the faith.
Yep.
And I'll hear this particularly comes out of the Eastern Orthodox and Catholic types who go, Protestantism is just diluted. It's so diluted, and in some respects they say that. But guess what? Like I said, you don't want to point that finger at just at us. It's a problem that is pervasive in the faith,
Yep.
because Satan knows that um, complacency, um, our own pride or unwillingness to address our own sin, those are those are chinks in our armor that he can exploit. And the people who are really not really in the faith are the folks that he can use to not only turn them from God, but also turn them into believers that what they're doing is correct. And like I said,
Yes.
nothing is worse. And then we go back to the Clancy when he was talking about the spies. The most dangerous spy was the one who was ideologically aligned
Mhm.
with the other side, because
Yeah.
they would be much more likely to take risks, to get big, to do what needs to be done to further the cause, because they feel like they're a soldier in that fight. They're not a mercenary. Look, I just want to get paid. I'm not going to do something too dangerous
Right.
because I can't spend the money if I don't live to see it.
Yeah.
Or the person who's angry and be like, yeah, I want to get back at him, but I want to, again, I want to stay alive. I don't want to get caught. I just want to get back at this one guy because he wronged me years ago, and that's what I want to get it.
Right. And you can
The,
see the curation of information over the last 3 years and how the entire event has been designed to hit certain groupings of people at certain times. It's like, what is the most easily motivated person in the world? A person who is depressed because they've tried everything to no avail and they're desperate for just something to alleviate the pressure, something to alleviate that pain. So you get the big broad sweeps first, and then you have, I guarantee you, there was a lot of people that came to the faith over the pandemic and over quarantine because they were so desperate for connection again. They had exhausted all their resources. We saw deaths go up crazy over quarantine from people abusing drugs, because they needed something. They needed something to make them feel real and alive again. So now you take people who have been so worn down over the last 3 years of this entire just mess that we've been in, who are now, they're in the church, and then people who have been, even in the church before then, people are morale across the US is at its lowest that it is, I believe, ever been on record. And like overall happiness for people in the US, according to a study that came out of the Chicago University, From 3 years ago, we are down, I believe it's either 17 or 19 points from where we were 3 years ago. And you have people that are so hurting in their hearts that they're going and they're seeking out faith and they're putting more stock into their faith because that's where at least they have some community and some connection. They're so isolated. Everybody's got to talk behind a mask or a face shield, depending on what state you're in or what airplane you're on. And now they're inside their really should be their safe haven for the soul. And now you have the tendrils of deceit and lies and falsity that have grabbed hold of that arena now. And you're now taking this message that was originally sent through the mainstream media veins and their tendrils is now repackaged and is being given to those who are the most destitute within the church. And they're already like, oh my gosh, I got it out there, now I got it in here. Well, at least it's coming from a pastor this time, somebody who I should trust to want to care for my eternal soul and want to care for my overall well-being. Well, if he says it, it must be the truth. And
Or they say, "Ugh, I got to listen to it here. Bye, see ya. I don't need. I'm just done
yes,
with it. I'm done with it all."
yep. And I think
And
for some it's gonna be the turn off, and for some of them it's like, okay, fine, I give. That's it.
yeah, and I think, and that's not a good. That's neither place is a good place to live, and that's why, like you said, that I feel like we've been socially engineered over the last few years just to think a certain way, or to, I'm sorry,
Yep.
not maybe think a certain way, but to feel isolated, feel more isolated. Maybe not
Yeah.
not just physically, but spiritually and mentally. Feel more
Oh yeah.
isolated. We feel like we're on islands. We have we can't get along with people online. We've tribalized ourselves based on, political beliefs instead of,
Yep.
you know,
Color of your
turning
skin.
instead of giving it over to God and going, we need to heal. We need to heal our faith. We need to heal our community, the faith community. And instead we're fighting the wrong battles. And what do we have here? We've got Warren. He says wearing a mask is the great commandment. Love thy neighbor as yourself. Okay, I mean, you again, that's a personal belief that you're reflecting. Now I know that you've made this is why you came to your personal belief, right? Or this is how you're justifying it, because you think you're doing something for good for somebody else.
Hmm.
Other people don't take that approach. Think that's good. They don't think it's good for society that we are doing this, and so maybe by refusing, they feel like, hey, so that we can get past this. I love my fellow man. I'm not doing this because I want to hurt them. I'm doing this because I want to help the community at large, because I
Yep.
do love people. And you know what? I don't. The sickness is real, but you know what? So is the mental sickness that people are suffering now,
Oh
the
yeah.
isolation, and all the other things that are going on. Um,
Oh yeah.
and I care about that, and I care about what this is doing to us, what these things are doing to our soul. What's
Yep.
more important than your health is your soul,
Yep.
because we're all going to die sometime one
Yep.
day.
And I think we were saying before, there's also a huge indictment on those in the church who are giving in and accepting the lies that they're getting from the pulpit as truth. Because these are people that they have access to all the same information that we have access to. They have access to the Bible. They probably have multiple Bibles in their home. And their willingness to comply and yield to people that are supposed to be quote unquote ambassadors for truth, who are being enlisted by Stetzer here, or no, sorry, by Collins. It's like you, as a one of the flock, you have an incredible responsibility as well to know what's inside the word, to know how to present yourself, to know how to live that life aspiring, to the uh the virtues that Jesus Christ lays out for us. And the indictment is that so many of them are rejecting their good sense, and they know they are.
Yeah.
They're rejecting the good sense, and they're rejecting the incumbent nature that being a self-researcher, an autodidact is for all of us. And if they really, really were serious about their faith, and they were really, really serious about what they choose to let influence them and what they choose to believe, then you have to look at these ministers who have built their careers on being one thing or another. Like Rick Warren, he's well known in many Christian circles as being a prophet. But you look up at his prophecies, and there are these just very incredible vagaries about the bulk of them. And it's almost like crossing over with John Edwards, where it's like, yeah, a broken clock is right twice a day. But you look at all the areas where they claim to operate in a certain gift and they have failed. Now, that doesn't mean that the flock should then just hate the person. It means that, hey, your credibility has been shot in this area. So now whatever else you say, I'm going to have to filter through the lens of truth, which is my Bible, which is
Right.
the discernment that God gives me. So it's such an indictment as well, like I said, on the people that are attending these services, to the congregation as a whole, and down to the individual, where it's like, look, if you recognize the pitfalls within your pastor's history and things that they have not gone on to publicly repent for, because let's face it, when you're in the public eye, to the degree that Creflo Dollar or Copeland or Rick Warren or MacArthur are, and you have put your foot out of line, you have to make it public that you have come to your sense, and that you've repented of your ways. But it still does not mean that you are suddenly going to get all that credibility back. And if people really, really were doing their due diligence, especially inside these congregations, they would know to be very wary of Rick Warren, of Kenneth Copeland, of Creflo Dollar, of Stetzer here. They
Well,
would know.
I think I think you mentioning John McDonald's is an honest take, because John McDonald's on the other side of this argument,
John MacArthur, oh yeah.
and he is very much, and I don't like and don't get, like I said, we're enemies, that we do dumb things on both sides. He's there, Jesus is my vaccine. No, it is a legitimate thing, and you need to take whatever steps you need to protect yourself. You can't just say,
Yes.
"Oh, Jesus is going to protect me." No, Jesus can protect your soul,
Yep.
right? He's not, and that's, again, that does, you've got the two different ends. You got Tim Keller, and Tim Keller's named in here, and I see a lot of Tim Keller that I just don't like his approach on things. We'll pray for his health. I know he's dying of cancer. It's very sad,
Mhm.
but I mean, it's sad. Flat. Period. I hope I hope Jesus. I mean, if Jesus feels the need to heal him physically, that's great. If he just wants to help him and his family find peace, that's you know that is what he's there for. I hope they all find peace, in his days, in what days he has left. But that said, when this piece from Daily Wire came out, did Tim Keller, or his son, who also operates his Twitter page, what was the outreach or what was the response to this? Well, on February 2nd, when this article came out, he doesn't really address it at all. Well, what he does do, post a link to his book for you to buy.
Mm.
Buy my book.
Yep.
Buy my book. And I get it. I get it. If you write something you want to, I have. If you are successful and if you are independently wealthy at the point that you are, when you are on the level that these guys are on, you should just be, for the most part, you should be doing the closest thing to giving these books away, if it is intended to kill. And I'm not trying to say that I'm an anti-communist, right? But I'm not talking about this from a corporation. I'm not talking about this from an entrepreneur,
Mhm.
from an industrialist standpoint. I'm talking about this as somebody from the faith, doing something of the faith.
Yep.
And
Doing
what
something
are we commanded to do?
selfless.
What is God has blessed you with things, and so now it's time for you to pass that along. So if you have something that you think needs to be passed on to other people, you need to be offering it as cheaply as possible. And I don't,
Yeah.
but when something comes out, a hit piece comes out, and you are named specifically, why is your take to go, well, just buy my book?
Yeah. And it's like, touching back on what I was mentioning just a second ago, it's like, not that we're supposed to withhold forgiveness from these people. We're of course supposed to forgive. Um, but definitely approach with caution anybody who has dropped out of credibility with you and is now trying to present a new truth or something that they're trying to now bend the Bible to make it say. Like Rick Warren is one I can't, unless he's reading directly from the Word. There is very little that I can take at face value from what he says. Because I have looked at the prophecies that he has claimed and made, and I have looked at that broken clock being right twice a day
Or
mentality
you
that he approaches it with.
speak in vagaries that are likely to come true, like any type of fortune teller out there.
Yes,
And you're like,
yes.
I know, I don't like it. It took me a long time to start to believe in the supernatural aspect of being a Christian of the world, where I had to come in and look at the look. God is a
Mhm,
supernatural being. Our enemies are supernatural in nature.
mhm.
And talking to people who have been members of the occult who have converted, but who have seen some shit, right? You
Oh
know, I've
yeah.
seen some shit.
Oh yeah. And I have too. It's wild because I definitely I don't deny the spiritual world either. Like I'm not a
Right. No, I know you
cessationist.
don't. I know you don't. I know you're very open on that.
Yeah, and like I'm definitely not a cessationist. I know some people they say that MacArthur is. I'm not sure where he really stands on are the gifts of the spirit are they stilted? Are they stopped? Are they for today? I believe that they are actually that they're operating today. And when it comes to certain people within the faith that claim to operate in a certain gift, it's like okay, we're not called to be gift inspectors, but we are called to be fruit inspectors. And so, while I can grant you forgiveness for errors of your past, and if you have made a genuine repentance, like this stupid book, The Physics of Heaven, that came out of Bethel, that is, to my knowledge, still being sold in their stores. Uh, and I hear people say, "Oh, well, they don't think that way anymore. That's stuff inside there is it's not the way that they think." I'm pretty sure they repented of that. Well, not if they're still selling the book. They haven't repented of that. And while I can grant the forgiveness and while I can move on personally, it doesn't mean that the person who has fallen out of grace or fallen out of their credibility with their congregation, it doesn't mean that they won't face prolonged scrutiny for years to come, especially if they have stepped out of the sanctity of their marriage. Like when you see people who, suddenly all these ministers popping up on the Ashley Madison
Oh yeah.
website. It's
Step
like,
down.
"Wait,
Don't give me. And that's why I said that's the part where no, I'm not going to push you. I don't want to push you out of the church, but you can't be in leadership right now.
nope,
That's
you can no
That's a
longer
big
lead."
mistake. You're that doesn't mean you're not worthy of salvation. That doesn't mean that we don't want you to we don't want to love you and support you and do what we can. But you've got to focus on other things other than ministry right
Yeah.
now. And
Well,
it's
you even look at King David, he has
and
several big blunders, and because of the blunders that he has, he falls out of the credibility of his own people. Even to the degree that his commander of his army, Joab, is like, "Yeah, no, I'm here. I support you, David, but we're not seeing eye to eye anymore." And
I'm not leading the charge in the battle right now because I know what's going to happen, right?
yeah, and God, of course, he doesn't take the kingship away from David because he made a
Right.
promise to David. He made a promise through the line of Judah.
And he
Uh,
knows what David's going to do. He knows that David's
yes,
coming back anyway. So
but he lost so much credibility with the nation. And when you see David after the death of his first son from Bathsheba, when you see him after that point, it is with a much more solemn and grim air that you even see him talking. And even to the extent where he's having that row with his son Absalom, and you have this woman who walks inside and gives essentially a parable to him, and she says, "What's to be done?" And David, he's like, "Oh my gosh, well, this and this," and she goes, "Okay, cool, because this is actually about you." Like
oh yeah.
where's she going to have the cojones to walk on up to her king and suddenly just give him this message, except for if he was a king who had lost some credibility and they have seen make these mistakes. It's like, yeah, he wasn't usurped in the I'm going to stab you and take your throne sense, but that credibility was shot, and he did face scrutiny through the rest of his life, even to the degree that God said, "Look, there is so much blood on your hands, you won't be the one that builds my temple. I'll leave it to your son, but I'm sorry, you cannot build my temple."
And I think that's a good segue. So we've talked a lot ad nauseum, and it's not going to be the last time we talk about it, I'm
Yeah.
sure, because it's
Hmm.
a pervasive problem. So we talk about the problem of ministers talking about the government points from the minister aspect, right?
Yep.
Because that's the part where we have the most control over. But we talk about David. David was one of the was the second king of Israel, and the first king before that we know was Saul. So here's the other side of the problem is the fact that we are that you have a minister pushing what the government wants told, and whether and so this here's the part that should apply to all of us within the faith is a weariness and a leeriness, hesitation. We don't live in a theocracy. We don't live in a Christian run government. Our government is very secular in many aspects, set up that way. Not as much as a lot of people want. A lot of the atheists want to say that
Yeah.
all of the founding fathers were deists, but set up in a way that there is a separation of church and state. And
Hmm.
while it's not freedom from religion, it's freedom of religion. The importance we need to do is understand that separation of church and state works in the church. We need to separate keeping the state out of our church,
Yep.
because the state has the state's interests and best interest in mind. That's
Yep.
not going to often line up, especially nowadays. It just
Hmm.
does not line up with the church's best interests.
Oh,
If the
absolutely.
state could, they would tax the crap out of the church.
Oh
And I
my
know that
goodness.
some people, and I get that maybe some mega churches need to be taxed, but
Yeah.
some churches definitely rely on that. Just the idea that people can tithe and use it as a tax write off. There's that, but don't think for a second that the government doesn't want that money. Don't think that for a second the government doesn't want the church to tell its congregation exactly what the
Hmm.
whatever current power, whether it's a Republican, a Democrat, or whoever, conservative or liberal, whatever you want to say, don't think that they don't want the church to be saying something a certain way. And that's why I didn't like it when churches latched on to Bush, when churches latched on to Obama, when
Hmm.
churches latched on to Trump,
Yep.
when churches latched on to Biden in some cases. I don't think there was much of that though, as it was for the other ones. Um, it always, whether I agree with this, even when I agree with somebody, when it's a candidate that I approve of enough to vote for them. That's a whole different conversation on
Yeah.
politicians, right?
Yeah.
But
No doubt there.
even when it's somebody that I feel like I think is going to forward what I want them to do, or that I support with my vote, I don't know that person. And when I see somebody from the pulpit speaking in support of that person, unless it's to forward unless it's directly in line with something that candidate, that politician is trying to forward, that is very much in line with God's word and
Hmm.
God and the fundamentals of Christianity, I don't want to hear you doing it.
Yep.
I don't want to hear it, and I don't want it to be insidious about it. I don't mind if we're having lunch later on, and we're just talking politics, and we're not we're off the clock talking. Tell me what you think. I'll have a talk with you. I might agree with you, I might disagree with you, but don't sit on that pulpit and
Yep.
do that. And it you might have a bunch of the congregation going, ooh, rah rah. We agree, but you're going to have people who wouldn't, and you're going to have people who go, why are you politicizing this?
Yep.
Why you
And
take so much away from the message when you've got something, or you make people think that there is no message.
oh yeah, and when we're supposed to be a collective of people, we're called by his name, we're set apart, he sanctifies us daily. When we are of that family, we're supposed to seek truth, and truth has to take a paramount position. Even Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is right going right through my head right then when you said it.
Yeah, so when you see anybody making any kind of statement from the pulpit, the big concern that the congregation has to have is that, is what I'm being presented the truth? Is my minister that I am sitting under, is he concerned with hunting the truth as hard as I am? And is, maybe they are saying something that they heard come from a governmental figure. It's like, okay, well, have they weighed that? Have they weighed it on its own merits? Have they checked to see, is what I'm being told true? Okay, it is too great. Now I can, I'll make mention of this in this service one day, but I'm also going to know full well that, hey, should this turn out to not be true, then there's going to be some repercussions for that. So
Right.
it, too
Is
many
it the
people,
way? Is it the truth? Is it the life?
yep, and too many
Does it
people,
check those 3 boxes? If it's one of them, it will be all 3 of them. But that's because one you might think it fits one and may not fit the other. Well, that's what that means none of them are true. It's not the way, it's not the truth, it's not the
yep.
life.
And if it's not
That's
truthful,
and
then
if
it's
there's any
serving.
type of doubt there,
Yep,
don't speak on it.
yep. And if it's,
Especially like it's
yeah,
not scripturally based.
if it's not truth, then it's obviously trying to serve some other means. And again, to hit it, like, we know that the love of money is the root of all evil. And that's where I have seen so many of these megachurch pastors really lose their way. And as soon as they do, you start seeing the the things that they preach on and teach on and their sermons, they take a decidedly secular shift. And you hear a whole lot less scripture actually preached from the pulpit. You hear more tie-ins with everyday life, and you hear way more calls to pop culture, and largely pop culture of within the entertainment realm, not even just pop culture as a societal whole. And when you see that shift, and you see the pastor trying to please the people in every facet versus presenting to them the hard and unyielding truth, that's when, much like you said, when looking at somebody who's wearing a $10,000 suit or he's got a $12,000 Rolex, that's when you have to look and go, all right, I am in the wrong place. This
Yeah.
person here has lost the way. And if I stay here, the chances of me meandering off course too. It's much like in Proverbs. Don't take up with a man given to violence, lest you learn his ways and become like him and ensnare yourself in the same trap. Well, don't take up with a man given to telling lies. Don't take up with a man who is so compelled by greed that they are now watering down the word to give you your little meals on wheels message of the day on a Sunday that should feed you just long enough to drag your mangy ass back in here next Sunday and have your next little dose of goodness that I have curated so that it keeps your butt in that seat, keeps you funneling money to this ministry, and then rounding up other people who can also buy in on the same pyramid scheme that
The
you
pyramid
bought in
scheme, yeah,
on.
exactly. It's the
Yep.
Lulu row of faith.
Yeah, the liminal order of faith. Ugh.
Oh, stop. Oh man. I was following that whole thing was
Oh my
that
goodness.
whole um sideshow, I guess, was the one that prompted me to do the kind of things that don't be don't fall don't put people up um as a way, well, as a way to be a better person. That's where you don't, if people are going to let you down, people are going to let you down, and
Yeah.
somebody who's telling you that they've got the way for you, if they're not pointing to the Bible, I don't, then it needs to be taken very serious, with a very serious amount of skepticism. But
Yep.
that all and that thing whole thing unraveled way worse than I initially, like. First I
Oh
was like,
my
okay, that's
gosh.
to me it's just
Yeah.
like, okay, you screwed up, and then I'm like, oh, okay, you are way out there. Not only that, but you're still doing it, and so that point again, and this is another guy. The Jack Murphy saga was another guy saying, "Get back to God." Right. Well, when all this stuff breaks loose, and you don't immediately have that moment of humility and honesty, and go, "I have a problem, and I have been hiding behind it, and I have been using it for good or bad, or I've been running from it." Right. That would have been the honest take for him to be
Yep.
a, just if he was honest, right,
Yep.
to say, um, this is a struggle with me, and I want other people to believe in God, but I can't. But he wants to hold on to that empire thing or that networking thing he's built so much because it's a cash cow, right? Because that was his whole justification for doing it in the first place, which I don't believe for a second. I doubt he believes much of what he's talking about. I think he just
Oh
found
yeah.
like the Copelands and the Austins. He just found
Yeah.
some way to prey on people. You can pray. This is why faith is such a precious thing, and
Mhm,
why
mhm.
making sure you're holding yourself accountable at a church is such an important thing.
Oh
Because
yeah.
when
People are so
people's
desperate to believe. They're
yeah, their
so
faith
desperate.
is personal. Nothing is more personal to you than your faith if you have it, and
Yeah.
if you
That's why
let
it's
if
so
you
painful. Yeah, that's why it's so painful if you believed a certain way for so long and suddenly you find out that it's completely incorrect. And you're now faced with having to sit with the realization that, wow, this thing that I've held on to for 40 years, maybe you were this kind of person where you believe that if you dropped your buttered toast, it was always going to land butter side down, and finally one day it lands butter side up, and suddenly, oh my gosh, this thing I've realized that I've believed in for 40 years is no longer true. The pain that comes along with having to make that realization is serious, serious pain. It hurts. That can break somebody mentally so quickly. And the
it
pain that comes from having your faith completely ransacked because somebody fed you on lies from the beginning, and now you finally get a dose of truth, but you're so rooted in your entire soul, your entire belief system is now built on all these lies. Suddenly, you have a crisis of identity on your hands, and you don't know how to operate. For some people, they will literally just shut themselves away from the world, and that's enough for them to break ties with anybody that they knew in the congregation. That's enough to make them quit their job and go be a hermit somewhere because it's so hard to process that. And when you have people that they have their entire spiritual life built on these building blocks of lies, and they have their minister say, hey, go do this physical act that should be discussed between you and your doctor, but I'm telling you now that, hey, because I've got it on authority that this is a good idea and that we have to go, with the common sense thing, go and do this thing. And then it turns out, God forbid, bad for the person or lethal for the person, even if it's not lethal, but it turns out badly for them. Now this person is sitting here going, I have a crisis because I put all my faith into this person who built my faith on lies, and now it's been destroyed. And
right.
now they don't even know who they are anymore at that point or what they
And it
believe.
or yeah, and it's nothing worse than seeing a broken person like that. But at the bare minimum, they walk away from the church, and that's what it was for
Yep.
me when I walked away from the church that I was at that was a toxic environment and it had toxic leadership. I walked away and I felt like, you know what? I don't need church anymore. And if it wasn't for my buddy, saying, "Hey, come with yeah, I know you had a bad experience. I know you're hurting right now. Come to my small group." And I ended up meeting, a good friend of mine through that because he and his wife were had just gotten married and they just started this out of their home, and we were meeting there, and it was wholesome, right? And like I said, my faith in the church was shaken, and I felt like it burned down to the ground. Not my faith in God, but if my hit it, but it could have easily um, shaken my faith in God. And
Oh
again,
yeah.
we go right back to leading people astray, millstone around neck, throwing into the ocean.
Yep. And if you
That's
think
not
about
kids, but
Yeah, and if you think about the enemy's plan overall, like we know that Satan and his cohorts, they're hell bent on trying to take down as many people as possible because they know that every life lost to God is a pain to him. It hurts him. They know that every single person that comes to the dark side, it's one less that he gets in his family. It's one less that he gets to bring into the fold and share his love with. And so he was first trying to take him out physically, having all of the firstborn male children executed. We saw that with Herod. We saw that with Pharaoh. Well, at the behest of the destroying angel that time around,
yeah,
save for people with the blood on the doorposts. But we've seen that at least twice in Scripture where there was an edict passed out that, hey, all firstborn males, they got to be killed. Um, and his his initial plot, let's kill him physically. Well, now, okay, the big I guess secret now is that he's trying to kill him spiritually as well. And it
This is the easiest time I think to do it.
it
You
is
know,
it is
in
that yeah, that's more or less where I was going with this.
in the Middle Ages, when you know, when when the Catholic Church had its had its dominion, they did have the benefit there of people were expected to believe, and for a lot of things that was all they had, and you didn't church had its own issues then, um, with existing and maybe making some mistakes and going with some actions that later on would come back to haunt them. But now we live in a time where we are so networked. The internet connects so much information, good and bad, true and false information. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got a way of getting their opinion out there, and there's pros and cons to that. Like I said, social media is terrible, but
Oh
if you
yeah.
find they can be used to serve some very, very good purposes. But it is very much a weapon that the enemy uses to wield against us
Hmm.
because of the outrage culture. The outrage
Yep.
culture, you know, Christians can do the outrage culture over colored Starbucks cups all day. It ends up making us look a little silly and petty.
Yeah.
But when we see an outrage culture because some dude couldn't bake a cake because he didn't want to, or because he didn't believe in it, and we want to feel like we need to force man to commit to labor against his personal faith, which is very easily identifiable in the Bible. It's not like he just he made
Yeah.
it up on the spot, or it was
Right.
something that he just pulled out of thin air. This is something that Christianity has believed in up until this point for the old time, and the folks who are true in the faith understand that. We understand what a sin is. I'm not going to glorify it.
Yep.
Like I said, Jesus didn't sit outside of the whorehouse handing out condoms to the Johns and
Yep.
telling
Giving
the
them
prostitutes,
license. Yep. Giving them license to
it's
do
okay.
evil.
Keep doing what doing. I'm gonna die for your sins. No, he said, stop doing this.
Yep.
Knowing that it's not going to be, it might not be something you can do overnight. The expectation is that you will, but understanding that the grace is that it is a path that you need to walk.
Yep. And that
Yeah.
actually, honestly, like that kind of leads me to the silver lining that I've found in all this, because the big question now comes with, okay, say a lot of these people that are unfortunately weaker in the faith, they take at face value these mega church pastors carrying water for evil, and say they go, they do with their bodies what they will, and say it goes badly for them. Well, then the question arises, okay, do we suddenly see a ton of people end up walking away from the faith because, oh, the last bastion that they had of truth has now proven to not be truthful to them? And so they're like, that's it, I'm done with God. And then do they take others with them? Is what happens when, if God forbid, you do have these people going and making health decisions that end up blowing up in their faces? Like, what happens now from then? um and as I said before at the top of this, I've seen Romans 14 used for positive and for negative. And just in my own searching today, actually, I was looking to see, what churches have really been impacted by this the most, and what do I see churches' response being in the face of the coronavirus pandemic. Um, one of I'm going to start with kind of like a downer, but it's going to end on a high note here. Um, there's a number of churches inside Atlanta that have actually been requiring vaccines for their congregation to even attend the service, which is a grave overstep on the church's
Yeah, I
on
think
the
that's
church's
inappropriate.
and yeah, actually, Piney Grove Baptist Church is, as well as a litany of others inside um, the Atlanta area, require you to sign a waiver, submit the temperature checks, and show proof of vaccination to just attend an in-person service. They've lost the plot. another church inside Florida, Impact Church, was going as far as to host vaccine events after 6 of their members ended up dying with the coronavirus. They ended up having literally a room on site there at their church to where after their service on Sunday, oh, you can go right on inside here and get vaccinated because,
You can get your vaccination right after you get baptized.
yeah, and it was coming off of their whole scriptural reason for doing this is, oh well, we want to love our neighbors, and how can we love our neighbor if we're not doing everything in our power to keep them physically healthy.
Right.
Well, that was the disheartening stuff that I saw, and it was coming out of people that I wanna believe in good faith that they had good intent in their heart, but given how their ministry has been built and given what I've seen of their ministries, um, very, very surface level, what I've seen them espouse and what I've seen them cleave to, it wouldn't surprise me if they did have nefarious intent when making this either edict to their congregation. You got to sign a waiver, temp checks, proof of vaccination, or saying, "Hey, trust in me, I'm your minister. Room over here where we have refreshments. We've also got COVID-19 shots. Go get one." It wouldn't surprise me if that was their intent, if it was more nefarious. But I
Yeah, I
did,
mean, and even then, you can still have the emotional aspect. You're not
yes,
thinking with your spiritual soul. You're
yep,
thinking as a knee jerk reaction, and maybe out of a bit of loss, you lose six congregational members, depending on
yep,
how big your um, congregation is. That's a big. I mean, if it was my congregation, that's a huge hit for us.
oh
And
yeah,
that would affect us very deeply. But again, it's a medical decision.
yep,
It's a medical decision that's personal to a person. If they want to reach out to their pastor, he should make himself available and he should do what he can to give them the most honest and the most thought out spiritually um, advice he can give. It's something that requires prayer. It's something
yep.
that you're doing to yourself, right?
Yep. You just keep setting them up for me to knock them down. So that leads me to the final church that I looked into today, is actually called Sandals Church. I don't know where they're located, but I went into it and
Tropical
I
island.
was yeah, right. Maybe it's just like the Sandals Resort Church. Just
Yeah.
like, hey, anybody who wants to pop in who's trying to nurse a hangover, well, come and get fed on Sunday. Um, but I went into the to watching the video and I was a bit apprehensive because the minister, that peppy kind of minister where it's like, yeah, everything I say is just kind of like this, and oh, there's my wife. Oh, my wife is so hot. Stand up, baby. Let him see you. Yeah, that's mine right there. You can look, don't touch. That kind of approach.
Yeah.
Minister. He was that kind of a guy. And so I'm like, all right, are you gonna water this down? What are you gonna hit me with here? And the I can't remember the title of the video, but it was asking the question, as Christians, what should you do with regards to the coronavirus, the vaccine, and moving forward? And he said several times inside his sermon that day, he says, "Look, we don't have to agree on every single thing." Says chances are if you listen to me talk long enough, you're going to sit here and go, "Yep, I don't agree with that." Or, if you're a person who has to agree with those who you associate with 100% and you're just waiting for it, maybe we've been thick as thieves for 6 years and suddenly you're like, "Oh, there it is. Yep, I'm sorry. I got to go. That's it. We're done now. We have to be 100%." He goes, "Look, we're not going to agree on everything." But he brought up the concept of not violating your own conscience. And of all the inalienable rights, this is one that wasn't written down, but it is the very first unalienable right that we have that's endowed to us from our creator. And that is the right to freedom of conscience, which means that you're not allowed to compel me into thinking or doing anything that I don't want to think or do. You can't violate my conscience into causing me to act in a way that suits your needs or somebody else's needs, because that violates me as a person. That violates my own bodily autonomy. And he brought up that idea, but he also talked about Romans 14. And inside Romans 14, there's it's largely he's talking about the principles of conscience. And he talks inside here, hey, look, we accept the one who's weak in faith, but not to have quarrels over opinions. and he gets into talking, okay, is it okay to eat something that maybe for some person it's a sin for them to eat that? And he says, well, okay, for you, between you, paraphrasing, for you, between you and God, you know it's not a sin, so that's fine. In your private, hey, eat whatever the heck you want to eat, but in mixed company, for the sake of the person who is weaker in the faith, because they do deem it a sin, act in a way that not just glorifies God, but doesn't cause them to stumble and
Right.
sin. And he really likened he likened that passage to the nature of choosing, do I get the jab or not? And he said, look, he says, I don't care what you do either way. He says, you can be for it, you can be against it. He says, you don't have to tell me. Don't write me the email and tell me. He says, that's fine. You will not be condemned. I will not condemn you. And this is when I was like, okay, wow, okay. So I thought one way going into this, but now my ears are perked. And he says the important thing is have your opinions. He says, but you don't have to be so hard edged about your opinions and your beliefs that you'll go online and you'll make it known that you actively rejoice when somebody who was unvaxxed died, or when somebody who was vaxxed died. He says, you don't have to go on there and delight in another's misfortune. He says, you can simply know between you and yourself what decision that you've made, and not make it anybody else's business. He says, there's even a passage of scripture where God says, hey, look, when you pray, go into your house, go into your closet, just you and me. Nobody else has to see you doing this. Now we know Daniel prayed out on his terrace because he was making a statement.
Amen. You ain't gonna tell me
That
what
was,
to do,
yeah,
governor.
that was a middle finger to Darius. But that's why also God says, hey, look, when you give, don't let your right hand know what your left is doing. There's a reason for not anonymity, but there's a reason for keeping things between you and God. And so for the very public thing, he said, the minister was saying, look, you don't have to make your social media so blatantly against something that isn't spiritual at all, to the degree that it ends up causing a brother to stumble and fall away. It says,
Right.
believe and think however you want to believe and think.
Or
I
that
will
you
not
break
condemn you.
fellowship.
Yeah,
Or that
exactly.
you
And
break fellowship of.
that was the big thing. He says, he goes, look, our church congregation is the size that it is for a reason. It was a very, very small church congregation. And he says, I'm concerned more for the person than I am for standing on what did he say? He said something to the effect of, we get so concerned about the issue that we lose our sense of concern for the person that is affected by the issue. And by the end of it, there was a couple of things he said that I didn't fully agree with. He had his numbers wrong on deaths caused or deaths related to the vaccine and deaths related to the virus itself, and survivability cases and whatnot. But the message as a whole, coming from Romans 14, that was, I think, and that was and what is rings the truest and loudest to me. And I just want to read a verse here from it. And this is on the nature of judgment, because too many people, they have essentially they have followed their party lines into the dark night, and because of that they have cut ties, very literally cut ties, with friends and family and kin alike. But Paul says here, this is after he says, no one lives for himself, and not one dies for himself. For if we live for the Lord, and if we die, we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be Lord both of the dead and of the living. But as for you, why do you judge your brother or sister? Or you as well, why do you regard your brother or sister with contempt? For we will all appear before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, to me every knee will bow, every tongue will give praise to God. So then each one of us will give an account of himself to God. Therefore, let's not judge one another anymore, but rather determine this, not to put an obstacle or a stumbling block in a brother or sister's way. I know and am convinced in the Lord Jesus that nothing is unclean in itself, but to the one who thinks something is unclean, to that person it is unclean. And that's where I think you can really stick a pin in the conversation. It's like, okay, for the one, it's not it's not an unclean thing to do. For the other, it is. So do we have to quarrel about, okay, you're wrong and I'm right? No. Like you said, it's a health decision that you're making for yourself.
Right.
It comes down to you. But hopefully you'll do the due diligence in seeking the truth out, arming yourself with as much truth as possible so that you make the most and best informed decision that you possibly can. But the condemnation that we see people give one way or the other, that we have got to do away with. And unfortunately, you saw so many of these pastors, without saying it, really leveling condemnation onto their flock in
Oh,
carrying
Rick
water.
Warren definitely, I think, did it very openly.
Yeah.
What was the quote I read from him? Hold on, I got it here.
Yeah, that was the disheartening thing. They really, really leveled that condemnation on their congregation, and so silver lining in all this, we get to choose, we get to decide. Um, in this instance, and obviously there's sins out there, and there's ways of life that, of course, are pretty obvious. Hey, look, the Bible tells us don't do this, don't do that. But this is one of those cases where, hey, if it's unclean for you, it's unclean. If it's not unclean for you, it's not unclean. But let's not kill each other over the right to
Oh,
disagree.
I take it back. It wasn't Rick Warren. It was
Hmm.
Tim Keller. He said. He said churches like John MacArthur's, which is what it is, represented the bad and the ugly of the good and bad and ugly Christian responses to the virus. And that's what. What are you doing? I mean, wait, how are you mending fences there? But I
Yep.
think but that's the thing, and that's what's the overarching issue of this rift. It's the government coming in and telling you something. It's an outside force coming in and telling you something is or is not, and you're using that as a cudgel against your fellow believers
Yep.
when y'all might disagree on the authenticity of it. And
Yep.
again, you know, I'm always open to be wrong about something, right? I could be completely wrong about this, but again, if I'm wrong about this, um, in what way am I condemned? And let's say I'm not going to condemn other people. It's if it's
Hmm.
look, be specific, and I don't like it when I see people's social media presence populated with just basically their identity is tied to their political ideology
Yep.
or
Or their
their
sexuality.
some sort of lifestyle choice that they've made. I think that takes away from the beauty of the soul inside of a person. If it's a beautiful soul, and I think that when God creates us, that's how He creates us. Um, you've just basically you've given that side over to something that's extra, that's outside
Hmm.
of where you need to be. And if you're pushing, like you said, if you're delighting in the misfortunes of people who disagree with you on ideology, but share your faith in God and in Christ, um,
Lost the
I
plot.
think you need to take a long. I think you need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and really assess where you're going with things. I get it. I
Yep.
get it. And this look when your family, if we're a Christian family and we all believe and we all love each other enough, and then that means emotions are going to run higher, right? Nothing is more fervent than zealotry, and we should all be zealots in our love for Christ. Um, so it's going to bring a lot of hard feelings out. It's going to bring anger and frustration. Well, we need to realize that once those tempers cool, that we need to run to prayer and do what we need to do to mend those fences that we've broken. I think that's the Christian community is going to need to do some of that at the end of this, because it has been fractured in many ways. And
Hmm.
again, what's the overarch? Who is the real perpetrator behind this? Is the government. The government came in. The government facilitated all this. They picked people that they knew would be compliant,
Yep.
and they peddled this narrative, and they put it in front of us, and they put it in front of us in all different medias. But then they knew where that the most pushback was happening in churches, because people want to go to church. If you're in going to church, you want to go to church,
Yep.
you want to take part in it, and you want that fellowship and spirituality. But what do we do? Okay, well, we'll let you go to church if you're talking about these. Look, a lot of
Hmm.
people don't. associate Rick Warren, like your pedestrian churchgoer doesn't associate Rick Warren as with super mega church. They associate
Yep.
him with whatever biblical study they're doing, kind of like
Yep.
oh
Oh.
crap, any of the guys that do the Bible study things, and some of them are very wholesome. But again, like you
Mhm.
said, you know this. Oh, Rick Warren. Well, I mean, he's did a really good study on marriage, that thing, and it really helped me out. So I mean, I feel like he's really insightful on this, and maybe he, like you said, maybe he knows something that I don't. Maybe
Right.
he's better in his walk with Christ because he's posing as if he's got it all together more. It's it's a difficult thing, but we're I guess we're at the end of our show tonight, and I think we've talked about what we've needed to talk here. But here's the wrap up the thing. The government from the big uh from Samuel, from or maybe the end of Judges or beginning of Samuel, God has told us not to trust the government. We're not going to like the government that we have. We're going to be beholden to them because we put the government there instead of God. So we're not supposed to trust them. We're not supposed to put our faith in them and whatever. Um, and so we should always be distrustful when we have any type of politics enter into our church that is not scripturally based. Like legitimate, like the issue is legitimately scripturally based.
Mhm.
Like homosexuality. Is one of the easiest ones to illustrate.
Yep.
We have to push that aside, and we have to push politics out of our church because the government does not have our best interest at heart. The government is populist. The government is secular. The government does not, just like communism or any other form of government. The state deems itself a godhead, and it is just as much as jealous of a god in practice as God tells the Israelites when they are led out of Egypt.
Yep.
So we have to do this. And then the final thing, we've talked about the virus. We have our opinions, and much of what Eric says I agree with. But it's your body, and your body is a temple. You have to treat it with the knowledge that you need to do. So please educate yourself,
Yep.
reach out, find whatever sources you think are appropriate. The NIH, the CDC, they are supposed to be leading experts. Read what they have to say, consider what they have to say, consult with your doctor, and make the decision that you feel best serves your interest. Again,
Yep.
with your body being your temple. Okay? Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself spiritually, physically,
Yes.
mentally. Reach out to people. And don't let an opinion on this subject burn bridges
Yes.
between you and your loved one and your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. Don't let it
Yep.
push you out of the church. Maybe push you out of a church, but don't let it interfere or be a stumbling block with your faith. And because again, that's the whole crux of this point is that
Yep.
the government and outside forces getting in the way of our faith. So, Eric, you got anything you want to close with?
No, man, that was beautifully said. Beautifully said. I guess I'll just throw my social media links here real quick. Thank you guys so much for checking out this stream. Stuart is a hell of a guy, and I always enjoy talking with him on these matters that not just strike at the heart of humanity, but also they they show where the connection between our spiritual walk and our physical walk bisect. And I really, really enjoy getting into these. If you want to try and find me on YouTube, my name is Angel Legend. That's with one L, ANGELEGEND. I'm also on Twitter at Eric, ERIC, Rolon, ROLON. This is, as always, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and your Twitter, your Facebook fan page, and your YouTube are all linked in the description.
Awesome.
So if you want to find him, he does some great. I was actually showing my son your completed Mark 6, Mark
Yep.
5
Mark
armor,
6.
and he was very impressed.
Awesome.
It was very impressed. He goes, "I want to be the Master Chief for Halloween." I was like, "Son, he built that by hand." It's like that. He did not go to a store. and put that together and
Yep.
wrote that by hand. And but he's got some of that stuff. But what he does also have is he gets into deep dives into the Bible on controversial issues that I'm going to have him on here talking about. And he is also doing various things. You're having talks with a friend of yours. Was it Power Keg Greg or
Yep.
Powder
Power
Keg?
Keg Greg.
Power Keg Greg. You can find them on where are y'all streaming YouTube on that?
Yep. Stream on YouTube. It'll
Streaming
end up
YouTube.
going to Rumble and Odyssey eventually.
Yeah, I think that eventually, because I look, we broke our rule. We were using the bad words the whole time,
Yep.
and I would not be surprised if I get a channel strike. But again, I'm a very small channel
Yeah,
right now,
you're still under the radar right now.
so I'll probably flying under the radar, or I'm just so small enough of a bug for them to just squash right immediately after the gate. But Eric's got a great perspective on things. He is a he is
Appreciate
a
that.
he is a he is a man of God, and I think that is a that his voice and his opinions on things are worth listening to. And I've thought that from day one, and that's why I keep having him on, because we have these 2 hour discussions, and
Mm,
they're always worthwhile and fulfilling. So
absolutely.
check out his Twitter feed, check out his definitely check out his YouTube channel. That's where you're going to find the bulk of the content. But the Twitter feed, you'll see where he's doing some other things, like he might do a podcast on something. He might do he might be live streaming with Greg, and just talking about things in life that affect us. So
Very much so.
with that said, folks, we will pick up on the Bible tomorrow. Go back into Leviticus, and good good times going on. Don't forget, Reverend Hans Feeney is gonna be here at the end of February on Thursday, February 24th, and
Awesome.
Billy Dyer is going to be coming on, and we're going to be doing some collaboration from that. And he is an excellent apologist, local apologist to me, and he has some good perspectives as well. So glad to fill my schedule up with people, so I'm not just talking by myself.
Absolutely, man.
All right, everybody, be safe. Again, do what's right for you. Take care of yourselves. Good night, and God bless.
Take care, y'all.